Are your expectations calibrated accordingly based on what you're doing? Now, this isn't inherently like, when I was thinking this one through, it wasn't like, okay, you want to lose 2 to 3 pounds per week, yet it's like I'm looking at it from a different perspective as, are you asking, like, even just starting the plan itself, is the plan so restrictive that off the bat you're going to have to make vast lifestyle changes just to technically be on track? Now let me paint a picture here, because I think a lot of times we want to give ourselves more credit, and it's good, it's good to have high standards and to set the bar really high in certain settings. But again, there is a ceiling in which setting the bar high now becomes detrimental to your ability to stay on plan, the sustainability of the plan, if you will. If the diet requires an immense amount of discipline out the gate, there's going to be a greater likelihood that even in a week's time frame, by the end of the week, that Wednesday, Thursday, that Friday, you're going to be like, oh, subconsciously I'm gunning for an excuse to go off track. Whether you're actively seeking it, that first week, I would strongly recommend, if you are someone who's like, hey, like I have always struggled to lose weight, I haven't found like a diet or a system that works well for me that I can string together multiple weeks of consistency, it's really, really important for you to take a look week one and be like, okay, how do I feel? Because it's like one thing to start a plan and be like, okay, like this is hard, but it's still fun. Like it's novel. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. How do I feel day 3, day 4, day 5? Do I still feel as excited? Do I still feel like this is seemingly easy for me to follow? Do I feel like some level kind of over all of the hoops that I have to jump through in order to like have a good day? I think it's important to assess, okay, like, do you have poor willpower? Do you actually like need to work on your ability to delay gratification? Because for some people that's going to be the case. Delaying gratification and being very honest about like, hey, like my capacity to do this is not very high. Cool. That's a skill that you can hone in on, and like you can demand more of yourself. But again, it needs to be in a progressive manner. It's not something you should just, I don't know, cold turkey be like, okay, I'm removing all the things that make me happy, and I'm going to be miserable and not enjoy any aspect of this. I don't think that's smart. I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's going to ultimately like foster change, at least for most people. But sorry, working back, do you actually lack the willpower? And let's assume, like, just for most people, it's not exclusively that you lack the willpower. You have some amount of willpower because you can stick to the diet day 1, day 2, day 3. If you're not able to stick to the diet day 1, the willpower thing, we probably need to take a closer look. Or we need to consider whether or not the diet is too restrictive. We need to assess, okay, what is the difference between what you've currently done versus what you need to do in order to be successful on the diet? So what does that look like? Because for me, like I've been of the belief, and this isn't just with dieting, I actually believe in the same philosophy like in relationships, is like simply having opportunities to go off track, to be non-adherent. It's only a matter of time. Like, I mean, completely avoiding them is impractical for a lot of people. Completely avoiding going out to eat, that's going to be tough. I mean, like, maybe you can do it for a while, but eventually you're going to be faced with that problem. And for me, I would much rather be prepared and be, let's just say, tested, so that I understand, like, okay, what is my reaction? What is my impulse? What is my default? So that if it's not smooth, if I do have a tendency or desire to go off track, well, at least I'm faced with that now. I'm faced with the reality that, like, oh, like, my adherence isn't impervious to temptation. Like, we get the chips at the at the restaurant. Like, every time I want to eat them, whether I'm in prep, whether I'm not, the desire to eat them is still there. It's just a matter of what happens in between seeing the chips on the table, or even like sitting down at the restaurant and knowing like, hey, they're gonna fucking bring me chips. Like this is gonna they're gonna bring me bread because that's what they do. And I would like them to do it normally, but right now I do not want them to do it because I will be tempted to eat them. Hey, can you, it's okay, I'm good. We don't need them. We're not gonna eat it. Thanks. Like, the desire might always be there to go off track because simply we're looking at the nature of dieting and the desire to kind of indulge. I mean, that's really at the core of it. That's what it is. Versus the desire to pause and consider, be like, hey, this behavior is going to result in this today. Okay, well, maybe it's just, yeah, I eat the chips today and then my weight goes up a little bit more overnight. But you know what? It's like, it's not the end of the world because I didn't have that many. But then you reflect on like, okay, but what if I do this every time I go out to eat? Because in this fictional setting, you're only going out to places that give you free bread and chips. Okay, well, let's say you go out to eat multiple times a week. Let's say that is a very common occurrence for you and you're always like, that temptation is always there. Okay, well, if you indulge every single time, what does that look like? Well, maybe if you're in a diet, maybe it results in no lost fat that week. Maybe you go to check in with your coach and you're like, 0.2. Fuck, like it's not good. I didn't move the needle much this week. Yet the real issue with this, it's not that you didn't like the weight didn't go down. That's not the primary issue. The primary issue is that week still contributed to you incurring dietary fatigue. So in your mind, you ate the chips, let's just say 3 times that week. Like you stuck to your like, I don't know, chicken and broccoli and rice order at the restaurant, or like you got something that was technically on plan, but you also indulged in the chips too. So you had the overage and like maybe you ate enough chips that like it actually resulted in you not losing as much weight as you want. And like the whole week as itself is a wash. Yet in your mind, there was so much of that week, the percentage of that week that you were not eating chips or not indulging in whatever food it is, there was so much of that week where you were having to exert willpower. So you consider, okay, like your willpower, it's a finite resource. As stress begins to go up, as stress accumulates as a whole, as new stressors come into the picture, it's like that resource will become exhausted. And then hopefully you do things on a regular basis. You have some kind of daily hygiene practice that allows you to, that allows that willpower to be restored. Cool. Maybe that is sleeping. Maybe that's lowering those stressors. Maybe that's taking time for yourself, whatever. But you're consistently going through that cycle of depleting willpower. Yet the dopamine, the amount of time that you're actually like spent enjoying and like, getting yours, eating the chips, eating the bread, whatever the food is, whatever the thing is that is accumulating, like it can even be just like snacking, like, okay, like, okay, I have the almond butter and like I have like, for me, it's like you have put like any kind of nuts like in the house. I'm like, so easy just to take like a handful here and there. And then like you do that a couple times a week, which that was like a real problem for me. Almond butter is like a whole other problem. Nuts, I'm like, okay, well, it's so easy to grab from. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for that in itself a few times a week, accidentally, unintentionally, subconsciously. Oh, I'm having a hard time. Okay, sure. Cool. Goes in the mouth. Well, now that deficit, which was the first lie, is like the deficit's not big enough. Like you don't know how to create the deficit. That first part of the equation, the first issue, you're not in a big enough deficit. And now your expectations are, okay, I'm going to continue to lose weight at, whatever degree I'm aiming for. But what you're finding is that like your efforts, they don't actually match up to what your expectations are. And that willpower is consistently being depleted. And over time, like, I mean, it's not even just like, okay, every week you get more willpower. It's like if you were on a program for 3-4 months, by month 4, you're probably going to be vying for at least like a holding period, at least a time where you get to be like, okay, like now I'm going to intentionally have these overages or have these flexible, intuitive periods more regularly. It's baseball season coming up. Okay, like I want to be able to go out with people and get drinks. I want to be able to attend like social events and not have to really stress about this. I want to have like a good chunk of time where I'm not in this like rigid mindset around dieting. I understand it. I do. It's just like where this becomes a problem is that you're consistently undoing that deficit in such a brief like a momentary lapse. You're having these brief periods where you're demonstrating cognitive dissonance, like this thing that you want to get leaner, you want to work towards your goal. But in those moments that frankly, that it's such a short duration of like compared to the rest of the week, those are ultimately undoing the 90% of the week where you're on track, where you're depleting that discipline. But I do, like I said, I do think that it's expected. I think it's something that like you should expect to have temptation like while you're dieting. But without a strategy in place, without the foresight to be like, okay, this temptation is going to be there and I know how to handle it. And I know that if I give in to this temptation, here's what it's going to result in. And I know that consistently every week that I burn where I don't lose weight, ultimately this is going to make it harder for me to get to my goals. I might not even reach my goals. If my goal is to lose 15 pounds in 3-4 weeks, yet I'm finding that, let's say 4 to 6 of those weeks, I did not execute well enough. So those weeks were kind of a wash. Well, now you have 10, 12 weeks of progress that ultimately were infringed on by those weeks. So you only really lost like 8-9 pounds, maybe. Let's hope that you did, in the course of almost double that amount of time dieting, where you could have lost 14, 15 pounds. And I think like when you're really clear about not only the size of the deficit that you need to be in, the ways in which undoing that deficit will affect you not just in the short term, but in the long term, like globally, the whole duration of the diet,